how do you make sure that something is really dead? Yeah, okay, that'll do. Hello, my fellow sorcerers. Today, I make a statement, a simple statement, but one that will shake the very foundation of Diablo. Sorcerer is no longer the worst class! And that's before we even get all of the buffs and changes that are coming our way, because I put it to you that the build I'm about to share with you, that is not just an Arc Lash, it's not just a Season 1 Arc Lash update, it's an entirely new take and way to play it that counters the nerfs that did affect it previously, while using new synergies to let it soar to heights it never had before. I mean, you're seeing initially just how fast this build is. I am almost just walking through the dungeon. It's only a low 33 or so, but even then, it's kinda a cheat code how quickly, smoothly, and easily I'm sort of just progressing. It's like you just walk to the end of the dungeon and everything sort of dies as it waves at you on the way past. But make no mistake, while its speed farming, XP farming, general overworld stuff is beyond compare, it still comfortably handles and pushes a tier 47 at this low level. Yes, obviously the Nightmare dungeons got nerfed, but it's all relative to everyone now, and the fact this is happening so effortlessly on a Sorcerer is kinda nuts. This build's natural passive run speed is over 150% to the point that the Butcher cannot catch you. Silly Butcher. And you'll regularly spend time at the move speed cap of 200%. You can just see how fast it's going, on top of double teleporting and, you know, one-shot exploding everything in huge groups as you detonate for millions of damage. And despite the cooldown reduction nerfs, we're still maintaining 80 to 90% uptime on unstable currents that has now been made more powerful than ever while it is on. And I'm not exaggerating. By the time the 10 seconds duration is up, I only have 10 seconds left on the cooldown, and then the leftover crackling energy is enough to get it all the way down to 0. On top of that, yeah, this build is so powerful that the crackling energy by itself, without me doing any Arc Lash or helping with damage, is enough to kill a pack of elites that are suppressed in a tier 27, which obviously is lowish, but is that not absolutely nuts? Like, you could just walk near enemies generally, and then they just die from being zapped thanks to a ridiculous synergy that I have come up with that I can't wait to get into and explain how it works later. I mean, how good did that just look? And yes, you're seeing that Barber is involved, because of course it is, because it's the most broken heart in the game currently, but it was made for this variant of Arc Lash, and it takes advantage of it mercilessly while weaving so much in. What else do you need to see? Oh, maybe the fact that it is the tankiest single sorcerer build that exists, even though it's at melee range? And it bursts bosses just as you imagine it would, as everything with Barber does. I cannot stress enough how much fun, fast, and above all powerful this feels, and it is an absolute blast to play and pilot, and I am so very proud of it. Arc Lash was always my favourite way to Sorcerer in the preseason, and Ice Shards kept pulling further and further ahead of it, and no more shall that be the case. Though Ice Shards is still incredibly good this season, and we will get to that in the coming week. In any case, let's jump into this, how to set it up, how to play it, how it all works, and all of that good stuff. Skill tree then, as always, is our place to begin, with 5 out of 5 in Arc Lash as the whole, engine of the build. Taking it to Enhanced, and then Glinting for that sweet, sweet cooldown reduction, and even Enhanced is very key for the double swipe with the crit, which is a double hit, which does all sorts of goodness for the rest of the setup. Then we move to core, where we will get just one rank of charged bolts in order to get enhanced, but more importantly destructive, so that while our unstable currents is blasting off random shock spells, it will randomly blast off charged bolts enhanced with destructive, so things stop killing us as hard, and it's part of what makes this so tanky. The other part of what makes this so tanky is the usual Sorcerer recipe of just take everything here. Flame Shield to Shimmering for that emergency button, and then teleport to not Shimmering. See, we don't get the damage reduction here, we do get Mystical. For 4 seconds after teleporting, crackling energy hits 2 additional targets, which means we get a number of extra pulses. Instead of just hitting the default enemies, we'll now hit 2 extra, meaning every pulse reduces the cooldown by 0.4 seconds instead of 0.2. So it's double effectiveness on the cooldown reduction of unstable currents just for teleporting, which we will do more often than every 4 seconds. This is a big way we overcome the cooldown reduction nerf, and it works super well. Now, there will be a time to take Shimmering, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. We grab Ice Armor just for the extra cooldown, the extra barrier, the extra survivability, and Frost Nova for that sweet, sweet vulnerable. 1 rank in Elemental Attunement just so the effect can happen, and with how much we're critting in this build, it will happen every 10 seconds. We want to get as much lucky hit as possible for a few reasons, and then we get our big defensive passive in protection for constant barriers from all of our cooldowns. We get 3 out of 3 Conjuration Mastery, as while we're in unstable currents, we are throwing out lightning spears left, right, and center, behind, sideways, diagonally, and that will stack up many, many times to a big damage bump thanks to this. We also do then put a point in Lightning Spear along with getting enhanced, as we are, again, critting a lot, and this will take Lightning Spear up to near 100% crit chance, which is a huge amount of damage, but more importantly, swirling around and stunning everyone is very useful for this build because our best and biggest damage comes against stunned enemies, ignoring vulnerable, of course, and this cleans the screen, as it were, and also makes all the enemies at distance non-threatening to you because they're stunned now. It makes the build feel so much smoother to operate. Then we get our enchantment slot in Ball Lightning. 5 out of 5 here, and then make it all the way to Wizards, and this is our Crackling Energy Generator. It will spawn Crackling Energy like no tomorrow, on top of contributing a lot of damage to the build itself. This is what lets us primarily actually take Overflowing Energy to use it as the way to reset unstable currents for that sweet uptime. We get 1 rank of Static Discharge just so it can happen, helps smooth out the Crackling Energy curve if Ball Lightning has a few unlucky moments, but then we also get Shocking Impact because we will be stunning people a lot. Spam teleports with Raiment, Lightning Spear flying round, and it really gets the job done. It's a bit of free extra damage, especially at range, and this damage also feeds into Barber 2, which works deliciously. Then we get the big damage burst of the setup in unstable currents. This makes you absolutely godlike with how much it amps you up, and then the attack speed is fantastic, as is the infinite crackling energy. While it's up, it will help towards resetting its own cooldown. We get 3 of the 4 lightning passives, as much crit chance as possible. Critting is everything to this build. We get electrocution, so everything deals 15% less damage. When unstable currents is hitting everything on screen, sending everything flying. Now everything is doing 15% less damage. Another reason we're so tanky. We also then get conduction, so we have a permanent 9% movement increase. We get this because A, it makes us clear faster because we're running faster, and B, it feeds into crit chance as this build does use Esu's Heirloom. Then we get Overflowing Energy as our key passive to reduce the cooldown of Teleport, which everything revolves around, and Unstable Currents, which everything revolves around. around even more. You get what I'm saying. And then our second enchantment slot is Teleport, as you no doubt saw in the demo gameplay, and this is, well, for pure speed, but also and mainly for an extra use of Raiment of the Infinite for more stacking and exploding thanks to our massive amounts of AoE and Barber's Malignant Heart on top of it. So this is how you will end up set up. Flame Shield is your oh no, I've been stunned and need to not be emergency button. Also, it gets you out of any given jam, really, along with the heal. Ice Armor for more general tankiness while you're sat there. You have a lot of baked-in damage reduction in this build, so you can hold your ground really well and not die, and Ice Armor helps with that. Get your Frost Novas on elites and bosses, keep them vulnerable to melt them even quicker, and then Teleport and Dodge is really where it comes to. You want to be consistently just teleporting onto a group of enemies, blasting them with Arc Lash, they'll pop with Barber, then you dodge, teleport onto the next group of enemies, blast them down with Barber, then you go to the next group of enemies, blast them down with Barber, and you see how it kind of flows. Your Arc Lash and your crackling energy is resetting the cooldown of teleport, and then dodge will come off to smooth out the gaps when teleport isn't quite ready. It's what makes this build so speedy, along with the fact of just look how speedy I am by default, and we get a lot faster too actually in motion. So see a group of enemies, teleport onto them, couple of Arc Lashes, and pop. Now, don't overdo it. Because of Barber, you are stacking up damage, so once you think you've done enough that the explosion will take everything out, and more than likely it will, just move on. That's why you see me getting to a group of enemies, and essentially all I do is teleport on them, hit them once, and then leave. Because this just stacks up so much damage that you don't actually have to contribute more on most enemies, especially open world, especially lower level nightmare dungeons. Just teleport, and then we can go. I didn't even do anything other than the teleport damage there, and they're all dead. That's how ridiculous this is for just general overworld content. Just boom, group of dead enemies, boom, group of dead enemies, and so on and so forth as you rampage along. And then, yes, the Unstable Currents is your big burst. Every time you get to an elite pack and this is off cooldown, press it. Every time you get to a boss and this is off cooldown, press it. It will likely be off cooldown because we reduce it so much with the crackling energy, as you saw, and while this is on, I mean, it's just silly. The attack speed is nuts, and this isn't even our maximum attack speed because we have accelerating aspect to talk about too, but as you can see, yeah, this is the good stuff and what makes this build so much fun. So let's talk gear and aspects that make this all function then. Starting with your helmet, you want might. That extra 20% reduction is really important, and of course it's permanently up from all of our Arc Lashing. You can get away with Frostblights for more Frost Novas, but it's not worth being squishy, especially when pushing, but it just helps you really cement yourself, stand your ground, and pump in damage into packs of elites to build up that Barber. Then, yes, Raiment of the Infinite, it's just needed, it's the best sorcerer unique, and you can't beat being able to group up stun enemies for then AoEing them down. It was best before, and it's even better now, thanks to, yeah, Barber's ridiculous AoE burst. Then, on our gloves, you want that accelerating. You will be critting with your core skills constantly, because while you're in your Unstable Currents, you are firing out Chain Lightnings that crit, and you are firing out charged bolts that crit. Therefore, you'll gain the attack speed, and you will reach silly heights of attack speed. To skip ahead on our amulet, as you saw, we've got basic attack speed as our amped up aspect. It's that important. So like a 45% there, another 25% there, a 25% from the passive of Unstable Currents, along with the base attack speed of a Wand and Focus, which is required here. You can see how high this can get, and you can essentially approach attacking 2 times a second, which is 2 unstable current random shock spells a second, so you fire out 20 shock spells in 10 seconds while this is up. Well, actually 24, and we'll get to that. Then, on your legs, you want ever reliable disobedience, pump up your armor, and again, we need everything we can to just stand our ground, take the hits, and Arc Lash away in this setup, so defensives are required. Then, Esu's Heirloom. This really powers everything. The movement speed on this by default, along with the movement speed you want to roll on your amulet, is what lets us just sit there at 150 movement speed. But more than that, 30% of it is converted to crit. So even right now, just passively, we're getting 15% crit chance from this one item, and it's boots that don't normally contribute that much damage. If we teleport and then have a look, for a brief moment there, it went to 37% thanks to the 75% movement speed after evading. We also get more movement speed from the talent that we got down here, and that adds even more crit, and then we get even more movement speed from some Paragon tiles too. So essentially, this build can end up sitting in the region of about 70% crit chance. I have 50% by default without in-combat things increasing it. That is beautiful. So I am really happy that this has kind of upgraded itself in my estimation as a Sorcerer unique, because it really lets you go fast and hit hard in a way that it never did before until this setup. Then on your weapon, this is nice to see, right? Unstable Currents has a 20% chance to cast an additional shock spell. This is what takes it up to that sky-high number of spells blasted off in the duration. The reason we get this is the only other really good alternative is more vulnerable damage with a barrier, which is nice, but without Frostblitz on the helmet for 2 charges, our vulnerable uptime isn't actually the best in this setup, and because we do get Unstable Currents off cooldown so often, this basically just translates to about a 15% damage increase for the build permanently, and that's really good on top of really heightening your burst window against bosses, and you do feel that. Then on our offhand, which again, you really do want these to be wand and focus, you want that inherent lucky hit chance, you want and need that inherent cooldown reduction, you want just more damage while you have a barrier, you'll have a barrier all the time, and this is just a solid increase. Ring 1 is control. You will be stunning people and freezing them constantly, mainly stun from your double teleport, but the freeze too, and for bosses when they're staggered. Then we also get crackling energy chains to an additional enemy. This was my big sort of tech discovery in the previous Arc Lashes that started letting us go towards infinite unstable currents. Sadly, we can't quite get infinite, only 80-90% because of the cooldown reduction nerfs, but this really helps counter it, and it continues to be a fantastic addition to this because every extra enemy is an extra 0.1 seconds. That means at maximum, by the way, this can hit 5 enemies at once in one crackle. 2 from overflowing energy, an extra 2 from mystical teleport, and then an extra 1 from this, which is half a second per pulse. Why, even just during Unstable Currents' own duration, it takes it down to about 20 seconds left without any extra help. Then, finally, as you saw, the basic attack speed on the amulet, so Arc Lash can Arc Lashy as much as Arc Lash can Arc Lash. So, your gems, you want vulnerable damage crit on your weapons, and then rubies for extra health so you don't die on your armor. Now, you could go with less damage while CC'd, but with 2 teleports to break CC and Flame Shield, coupled with not standing in things, you shouldn't really find yourself stunned, feared, frozen, etc. too much, so we can get away with just more general health to, again, stand your ground more. Then, when it comes to the affixes you are looking for, there is 3 main ones you really can't go without. Cooldown reduction on every piece of armor that can roll it, helmet, necklace, and your focus. That's just something you need. You need unstable currents to drop under 50 seconds ideally, and of course it helps with everything else. Past that, then, you want as much attack speed as possible, and basic skill attack speed to get Arc Lash going, and that's really, really good. And then thirdly, you want critical strike chance everywhere you can get it. Those are the three big ones. After that, you want lucky hit chance, you want crit damage, vulnerable damage, int, ranks of defensive skills, ranks of your ball lightning, and then everything else past that, like close enemy damage. So that's all good there, and yes, get as much crit chance as you can get, as much attack speed, and as much crit damage. Crit damage with lightning is just as good as critical strike damage, and then when we look at cooldown reduction, 30% is that sweet promised land you're aiming for, with as much lucky hit too to get as many ball lightnings down as possible. Lastly then, Malignant Hearts are finishing off our gear. We want, in our first ring, your Tell Rashes. This is just such a good heart. It's simple, it's straightforward, but it's so effective. 10.5% or up to 12 multiplicative damage for every element you use. Fire comes from our Flame Shield, lightning is obvious, and then actually, Frost is much more difficult because we only have Frost Nova, which does 0 damage. However, we still get 3 stacks of this because the damage that Barber deals is Shadow, and other elements do count towards this, not just the 3 Sorcerer has naturally. If you get a Nightmare Dungeon with Poisonous Evade, that will give you a 5th stack, as Poison is another element that counts towards this. It's just too good, and essentially will be in every Sorcerer build, because it is such a big passive damage increase, just for doing what we would want to do anyway. Then we want Pikana in our second slot. You may be asking, hang on, this build's all about crit, why no Tempting Fate? Well, the issue with Tempting Fate is even if you have 100% crit chance and 200% crit damage, you're still only getting, mathematically, about a 20 to 25% damage increase for doing that, which is kinda lame. The reason being is the critical strike damage increase is additive, but the damage down is multiplicative, so it's more severe than the upside. It still is a gain on crit builds, but it's less of a gain than it looks like it should be, and honestly this heart is a little bit of a bait because most classes will have 3 better ones to choose. As I said, even at max crit stats, you're only getting 20-25%. At normal crit stats that a crit build will have, yeah, you're just not feeling it. You really, really aren't. So Pikana instead is fantastic for us. We're always critting, and when we use Unstable Currents, we crit every enemy on screen, which means every enemy starts pulsing with this damage that is boosted by all of your stuff, and this damage that then feeds into and starts building up Barber when it crits. This combination of Pikana and Barber is what made this happen when this entire horde of enemies just sort of passively died while being near me. One of them got zapped, it triggered Pikana, which then spread to the others, which triggered Barber, and they all detonated. So that will just happen around you, and for speed farming, for overworld content, for nightmare dungeons your level or easy ones to you, and so on and so forth, this is MVP. However, it is at this point then that I highlight a change you should make if you're going to use this build to push high-tier nightmare dungeons. You want to instead use the Brutal Heart of Revenge over Pikana when you're pushing, or doing something particularly difficult. That flat damage reduction is massive, and it will help proc Tell Rashes with the Fire Burst, and then just the extra damage is nice too, but the mitigation is golden. If you make this swap, you also then want to, instead of Mystical Teleport, get Shimmering Teleport for the extra survivability, because you'll need it if you're doing something hard enough to need to make that swap. But by default, easier content, farming, etc., the way round that I initially had it is what you need. Then, yes, the star of the show, the Wrathful Heart of the Barber. So you crit an enemy and then you just cannot deal damage to them for the time it says, then they explode for the total damage multiplied by 14% per second to everyone around them. Now you might be like, oh, shame you've only got a 2.7 out of 4. Actually, it's a shame I've only got a 2.7 instead of 2. You want this to be as low roll time-wise as possible, because when you're clearing out packs of enemies, you don't want to wait 4 seconds for them all to die. 2 is the sweet spot. Store it up, multiply it a bit, AoE, they're all dead. You don't need 4, it is overkill. Technically, you could have a second amulet with a 4-second one just for bosses, because that's when it is better, but for 95% of the dungeon, you want 2 seconds so random groups of enemies and elites die quicker, and you're not waiting around. So that's why I have gone for the lowest one that I have, which is 2.7. Oh, and you may be wondering, with Barber and the Ball Lightning enchantment, surely when you crit, then you stop doing damage to them, you're not critting anymore, so you can't spawn Ball Lightnings. That does make sense, but as you've been seeing in the gameplay, that's not the case. Ball Lightnings crop up all over the place because our crit chance is so high, along with our lucky hit chance, that initial crit that starts Barber, most of the time will spawn a Ball Lightning. And, you know, self-evidently by what you're seeing, we're never short of crackling energy. And that kinda does it for what you're wearing and why, which just leaves then the Paragon tree. Now, I am as deep as I can be into it at the moment, after all the farming and grinding I have done, so let's go along this path then, shall we? Follow my route here, and the first glyph you want is Adept. This is to increase the size of Ball Lightning, so it hits more enemies, does more damage, and it triggers crackling energy more often. It's very good for this setup. Then we move up here and go in to the Static Surge board. This is why we have the Teleport enchant as well, because this board is all about damage to stunned enemies, so between 2 teleports we are stunning enemies constantly and really feeding into that. Go up and grab this cluster around paralyzing, then make a beeline for the glyph slot, and in this glyph slot you want control. More damage to stunned and frozen enemies, which again, yeah, all of the time. Then we move on, get Incapacitate, and then move all the way around to Overwhelming to finish off this board before poking our noses in to this just for the legendary node, the Ceaseless Conduit. So go round up here in this orientation, get the plus damage to elites, but also the movement speed after killing an elite. This will mean that after killing an elite, you will move for 4 seconds at 200% move speed and gain 30% chance to crit in the process. Also, the extra damage to elites is just really nice, and then finish it up by here and get this, so we don't use crackling energy charges quarter of the time, and the damage itself is buffed. This is amazing. A crackle energy not used means more cooldown reduction, and as you saw, the damage it does really does contribute, so it doing more is only a good thing. After this, you want to head north out of here, where you will get your next board. The next board will be Frigid Fate, and you want that because you want to pump your vulnerable damage from your Frost Nova, and you'll put it on in this orientation. Go up, grab this, and that's all good. And then in this final glyph slot that you will unlock here, you will put in yourself Destruction for more critical strike damage and more damage in general from your crits. So hopefully that will give you enough to be going on with, and well, that's that. Have fun using, destroying, and just feeling the power and speed of ultimate, actually lightning Arc Lash. I'm so proud of this. I'm so happy with it. I cannot get over how well it worked and how good it feels to operate, and I really do hope that you give it a go, because you won't be disappointed. For now then, like you've enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more. Consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below. It does keep us going, and it means the world. Until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.